What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Hope all you Trekkies out there are having a wonderful day because we all just got to experience what I think is the best episode yet in Star Trek Picard Season 3. Episode 4, No End Scenario, is directed by Jonathan Frakes and written by Terry Matalas and Sean Tretta. And I'm sorry this review is up so late. I got up at 6 this morning to watch the episode. It's like, I'm going to get up early. I'm going to watch the show. I'm going to get my review out there like at 8 o'clock, be one of the first. But as soon as I was finished with the episode, I was like, well, maybe I'll just close my eyes for like a minute or two before I make my coffee and get going. Suddenly I open my eyes and it's like noon. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, like what the hell just happened? So it's almost like the episode is like this weird, intense dream that I had, and I remember it very well, and luckily I took copious notes while watching it. But it's weird when you're sleeping for a few hours, wake up, watch an amazing episode of TV, sleep a few more hours, and then try to talk about it. But my memories are very strong, and my memories are very positive, and I'm going to say something that I don't think will be controversial for anybody that is watching this show. But my non-controversial hot take is that as of Thursday, March 9th, 2023, I think that Star Trek compares very favorably to the other major franchises out there, and in many cases is superior. And I haven't been able to say that for a very long time. Like, look at Marvel. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. That is what Marvel has out there right now. Well, I think Star Trek Picard Season 3 is better than that. Or Season 3 of The Mandalorian. That's what Star Wars has out there right now. I think Season 3 Picard is better than that. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, they're working on Season 2, but this is sure as shit better than Season 1 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. And DC's in a weird holding pattern where they're kind of flushing out all the old movies and gearing up on new ones, but we've got a Shazam movie about to come out, which I'm not even going to see. So yes, I think Star Trek compares very favorably to the DC films. I think the only franchises out there right now that are ongoing that I think are stronger, maybe the John Wick series, and some of the series that you might see over on HBO, like House of the Dragon, which I think is about as good as TV gets, or even shows like The Last of Us. Long story short, it's just nice to be able to say, like, right now, Star Trek fucking rocks. And if people want to call me a fair weather fan or a bandwagon fan when it comes to praising franchises when they're going strong, that's totally fair. But my attitude is, no fictional setting, no series of books, no TV show, no movies, no video games. Nothing deserves our blind support. Nothing deserves a built-in audience. I feel like every episode of TV, every new movie in a franchise, every new book in a series, you have to kind of woo and seduce your audience all over again. And I feel like if you don't, well, then you run the risk of getting complacent or repeating yourself or taking them for granted and just assuming that they'll watch anything while you take the series in a totally different direction. I remember there were a lot of comments like that when Season 1 of Discovery came out, that they didn't care about fan backlash because they figured that the hardcores were going to watch no matter what. And I have not been watching Star Trek for several years now, but I'm just having a hell of a lot of fun, having Thursday to look forward to every week. And we've still got 6 more episodes to look forward to, and from what I understand from all the people out there who have seen the entire season, the best is yet to come. So let's dive into what made this episode work so well, and let's start with Jonathan Frakes as both actor as well as director. In a lot of ways, I feel like Jonathan Frakes is giving us some of the best interpretations of Riker that we've ever seen in Star Trek, and he's just really going for it. And obviously it helps when you know the director. Like, oh yeah, I know the director. He's going to give me a great shot or a great moment. And then you just put on your director hat and be like, hey, all right, let's frame up the shot where I look really cool right over here. But I was listening to an interview with him where he was talking at length about how a lot of directors struggle with scenes set on the bridge where they feel like they're kind of closed in or have a lack of options in terms of angles and setups, but that he gets like really excited to shoot scenes on the bridge, and he recognizes that the drama on Star Trek is at its most intense and its most gripping when you have a great script and a great cast on the bridge just dealing with complex problems. And I feel like this episode is an excellent example of how you don't need a ton of special effects. You don't need a ton of fight scenes. You just need like high-level problem solving with dire consequences on the bridge. And I was wildly entertained throughout every single scene set in that location. And for nearly 60 years, the best characters in the Star Trek universe have been wrestling with the so-called no-win scenario. And there's a great scene in Wrath of Khan where Captain Kirk is talking at length, or I guess he was Admiral Kirk in Wrath of Khan, but talking at length about how he doesn't believe in no-win scenarios, and it's a really good scene. But here we see the Titan. It's sinking into a gravity well. The ship is essentially dead in the water and bleeding to death. And every time they use any systems or redirect power to another system, like overall the ship is just losing its ability to sustain life or even attempt to escape this gravity well, where on a regular basis it's sending out these bioelectrical waves that are just basically ripping the ship apart, ripping its shields apart. And long story short, no matter what they do, it appears as if they have a couple of hours to live. So the question then remains, what are they going to do with their time? And I guess that's the question for all of us. When we know we are facing certain doom, what are you going to do with the time that remains to you? And Riker tells Picard that some of his accusations about his feelings about his son in the previous episode, that he was right, and he advises Picard to spend the next few hours getting to know his son, which becomes a huge part of the episode. And I feel like a lot of these scenes prove once again that Star Trek is always at its best when you just have a great script and great performers who are just ready to get after it. And obviously we all love seeing, battles in space and that sort of thing. You need all of that. But once again, I feel like the heart of Star Trek, it all goes back to character. And what I liked about the writing in this episode, there was this one recurring kind of device or structural motif where they kept flashing back to 5 years previously when Picard is in a restaurant and a bunch of young officers interrupt him and want to hear stories. And he tells them he's not big on telling stories, but that if he can remind them of anything, it's that if everybody on a crew is steadfast and loyal, that your ship is only as good as the weakest link. You're only as good as your crew, and that if you don't remain loyal, and if everybody's not firing on all cylinders, well, then you're going to get into a tight spot. And I appreciated everything he was saying, but I was like, but this is also kind of dripping into sugary, sweet, syrupy, kind of sentimental nonsense. However, when it comes to story structure, there was a great little twist at the end where we see that 5 years previously, that Jack Crusher was there in that crowd at the bar, listening to everything that Picard had to say. And he asks him, all these stories about Starfleet are well and good, but did you ever have a life or family outside of Starfleet? And at the time, Picard kind of dismissively said Starfleet was the only family that he ever needed. And you can see the sadness and the bitter disappointment in Jack as he's wrestling with whether or not to reconnect with his father. And then when they cut back to the bar, we see that he's gone. And so I love it when an episode surprises you, where you think, oh, this subplot's going nowhere, this is boring, etc. And suddenly you realize, oh, the biggest emotional payoff of the episode was in the context of those scenes that I was all too quick to dismiss or disregard. And those scenes were really the only relief from the main plot this episode. And I think that was the wise course of action. As much as I would have loved to have had some more scenes with Worf, because Worf is one of the coolest characters in the history of Star Trek, I thought it was a smart choice to not let the audience escape from the tension aboard the Titan, where they're fighting quite literally to save their lives. And there'll be plenty of time for scenes with the other characters over the next 6 episodes. But yeah, when you're trying to sustain tension and suspense, don't give the audience a chance to exhale, apart from obviously these 5-year flashbacks. And I loved how the episode was cross-cutting between several characters aboard the Titan and all the various things they're trying to accomplish in the hours that remain to them. And I think my favorite storyline this episode, as good as Jonathan Frakes was, my favorite storyline this episode was that of 7 of 9. What was great about this show is how there are several characters who are competing to be my favorite this season. Like Captain Shaw is one of my dark horse candidates for one of my favorite characters on the rise. And obviously, Riker's always a total badass, but I think 7 of 9 might be my MVP for this episode. And there's something about the way Jerry Ryan is handling this character this season where she just seems so lethal and so efficient. And I think that's one of the reasons I get frustrated with a lot of modern Star Trek, is that the characters just seem like kind of, overly emotional high school students. For my money, I like seeing Starfleet officers operating with ruthless efficiency, with a very high level of intelligence. And I feel like 7 and 9 absolutely delivered on that front this episode, as she's trying to hunt down this goddamn changeling that keeps retreating into the walls and wreaking havoc wherever it goes. And there's a really cool scene where 7 of 9 and Riker are speaking to each other, and he mentions how he could reinstate her. However, he prefers for her to remain in an unofficial capacity as she hunts for the changeling. And she's the first to point out to Shaw that the changeling has been on board the Titan since before they picked up Jack Crusher and Riker and Picard. So clearly something bigger is happening than just the story of Picard and his son. Like there's a vast conspiracy or a vast threat that is unfolding before their eyes, and slowly but surely she's picking up on little clues that'll help them put together the larger picture. So once again, that high-level problem solving is what I really yearn for in any episode of Star Trek. But in addition to the problem solving, we also just get some good drunken bonding scenes on the holodeck. And what was funny is how when Picard and Jack walked into the holodeck, the first thing I thought to myself was, wait a second, they're diverting power from all non-essential systems to keep the people alive. Like, why is the holodeck still up and running? And they had some like throwaway line like, oh, well, we decided a long time ago that it should have its own independent power system just in case people need to do some soul searching before their untimely demise, which I thought was a bit of a screenwriting cheat in order to justify the existence of these scenes. But at any rate, this is all just crap people are making up and pulling out of their ass. So I feel like I'll give them a pass for that little cheap excuse as to why the holodeck is allowed to be up and running. But we see how one of the main differences between Jack and Picard is that Jack is not a wine man, which is obviously like a stoning offense when talking to Jean-Luc Picard. But he mentions how he likes whiskey and he likes it cheap and he likes it on the rocks. And I can appreciate his sentiment. I drink relatively cheap whiskey here and there on the rocks. Like Jameson is neither cheap nor expensive, but it's just good old-fashioned Irish whiskey that you can find in every bar in New York. So it's kind of my go-to. Yeah, Jameson on the rocks and I'm off to the races. But I prefer drinking single malt scotch, just neat. But I could appreciate Jack's sentiment that he doesn't want something overly fancy or overly fruity. Sometimes you want to drink something that just tastes like gasoline or like rocks, and whiskey absolutely qualifies. But he also asks his father, they got to address the elephant in the room. When does the hair go? And as somebody who started losing their hair when they were 17, I had that same conversation with my father. And what was fantastic is how Picard gave Jack the exact same advice that my father gave to me. Enjoy it while it lasts. But the main thrust of these scenes in the holodeck is an opportunity for Picard to tell Jack about a time where he and the original Jack Crusher were stranded out in space because they'd stolen a shuttle in order to basically keep a date or to accept an invitation with two young ladies. They were trying to get laid, as Jack says, but they got hit by a big-ass asteroid. Their systems were shattered. But at the time, they came up with a solution where if they were able to divert power back and forth between life support and their engines on very little impulse power, they could slowly but surely, inch by bloody inch, make their way back home. And it took hours, but it just shows how even in that no-win scenario, they were able to come up with the solution. But what was fantastic about this scene is they did not allow it to kind of revert to or surrender to nostalgia or sentimentality, because Shaw comes in and says, I've got a story I want to share. And he tells the story about when he was just a lowly grease monkey, kind of just getting started with his career, when many ships and many thousands of people in Starfleet got killed at the hands of a Borg cube. And on that Borg cube was Locutus. And in the words of Shaw, he was the only Borg that was deadly enough that he deserved a name. And those episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation are really intense and well worth revisiting many times over. But I just like how it shows this is one of the formative events in the character of Shaw. And it kept the scene from getting to be too sugary sweet. And I feel like that's another thing that a lot of Star Trek has a problem with. They surrender to melodrama, which makes me just want to fucking barf. And then just to wrap the scene up with a great little laugh, Shaw tells the rest of the people in the bar, forgive me, at some point, asshole became a substitute for charm. So yeah, Shaw, dark horse candidate for one of the best characters this season. But they finally start getting, I guess, a handle on the problem or a possible option when Beverly realizes that these bioelectrical waves are a lot like contractions in a birth, and that it's a countdown. She and Jack come up with this idea where perhaps they could use these waves to briefly power the ship and almost like a surfer, ride the wave out of this gravity well. And when they're making the pitch to Riker, he's like, no, the official protocol is to wait for help. And Picard's like, look, no help is coming. This might be our only shot. And ultimately, Riker comes around when they tell him, look, if Deanna Troi were here, she would say to trust each other and do what they do best. And it was a very emotional moment when you realize that all these characters have decades of shared history, decades of shared adventures, decades of expertise. And in the end, they got to lean into what they do best, rely on each other as a team, and get the hell out of this no-win scenario. But while the crew of the Titan is hard at work, we see that Vadic is hard at work over on the Shrike, and she feels like the Titan is beyond their reach, but she does this thing where she slashes her wrist and basically her hand falls off and turns into this giant head and tells her that she needs to pursue the Titan and to retrieve a particular asset, and that she and everyone on her ship, they're to be considered expendable. And I couldn't quite tell if Vadic is some form of changeling or not, because my knowledge of changelings is basically limited to DS9, and back then the special effects for the changelings was pretty limited, and I don't remember ever seeing one do something like that. But I'm assuming there's some sort of connection between whatever species Vadic belongs to and the changeling that's been operating aboard the Titan, sabotaging everything they're trying to do. And speaking of the saboteur, 7 of 9 finally successfully takes it down. I love how first she's looking for this little pot where they have to rest and reconstitute themselves. Odo on DS9, if he had to remain in solid form for like more than 16 or 17 hours, he would get really grouchy, or even more grouchy than he ordinarily was. He was a pretty surly guy, but he would always go into his little pot, kind of sleep and heal. So I love that they brought the pot back for this. But they finally managed to kill this thing after they successfully recruit Shaw to help work on, I don't remember the technical terminology, but he's basically setting up the ship in a way where it'll be able to receive and process and convert the energy of these waves into energy that they can use. But he's left express orders that nobody's to interrupt him and 7 of 9. LaForge walks in. She acts like she's there to help. She's like, "Oh, but my dad's like the greatest engineer in all of Starfleet. Like, what can I do to help out?" But the changeling slips up when speaking to 7 of 9, because the real LaForge always refers to her as Commander 7 as a term of respect and admiration. So, yeah, 7 of 9 melts her down then and there, and huge surprise, the giant surfing trick works. The ship starts getting charged up. They're blasting out of there, but they see that the Shrike is waiting for them. And then, much like when the Shrike threw a ship at the Titan in a previous episode, Riker uses their tractor beam to grab a giant asteroid and chuck it at the Shrike as they're flying toward them, knocking them out of commission. And it was just a nice little bit of payback. And I can't remember, I think it was Beverly. He was like, "Did you just throw an asteroid at the Shrike?" At any rate, it was a great Riker moment. And speaking of great Riker moments, I forgot to mention, there's a great scene where Riker asks Picard to take command. The only part of that bit that I didn't like is when Picard asked for Jack to start calling out the position of the asteroids that they're navigating. I'm like, well, don't you have people like LaForge who probably would do a better job? But I get that they're trying to show them doing some father-son bonding. But Riker puts Picard in that position because he says, "You're the only one with experience, navigating without any sort of traditional information, et cetera, and so forth," which is maybe a slim excuse, but it got Picard back in the position of command, which was very satisfying just in terms of the overall drama of the scene. And another satisfying bit is when they see that this giant birthing process has erupted with all these space jellyfish, for lack of a better word. And I think it was Beverly who just reminds everybody that their mission has always been to seek new life. Anytime Star Trek is able to get back to the core of what it's all about, to boldly go and/or to seek new life, that is the core of the franchise. And people always talk about like what makes Star Trek Star Trek. I guess a spirit of optimism is a key part of it, and teamwork is a huge part of it. I think that's one of the reasons why this show seems to be unifying all Star Trek fans of all generations, because at this point, you've got people like my dad's age, who's in his early 70s, who was watching Star Trek in the late 60s, and you've got people who are in high school who are watching shows like The Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds and things like that, where different generations have different storytelling priorities or what they want to get out of a storytelling experience. But somehow, and I think because Terry Matalas was one of the writers on this episode, they're able to find that perfect overlap point in the Venn diagram between all these different generations and all these different kind of tribes within the Star Trek fan base, and finding a story that proves that they can all get on the same page when you really deliver a story that remains true to what the Star Trek universe is supposed to be all about. So it's hard to know what the future might hold for the Star Trek universe when it comes to getting the right writers and the right filmmakers to take the franchise in the right direction. But for this brief shining moment, like I mentioned before, March 9th, 2023, Star Trek is fantastic. It's really satisfying. It's out-competing a lot of other major franchises. And like any good episode, it ends with a nice cliffhanger where Jack has another one of those crazy nightmare visions with like roots on the walls and red lights and doors opening and a voice saying, "Find me." I have no idea what's going on. I have not read any spoilers about what's coming later in the season. I'm totally clueless and oblivious. And if there have been clues as to what these visions might signify, I have not processed them or I've overlooked them. So if you have any great theories, let me know in the comments below. But also just let me know what you think about the show in the comments below, because I think we need to savor this moment where Star Trek is good, because who knows, this moment, not to be a pessimist, this moment might not ever come again. But on that down note, let me start wrapping up this video with a special public service announcement, because Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel, they now have beard products and a brand new nose and ear hair trimmer. If you haven't already heard, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming are traveling north of your South Pole with the revolutionary Beard Hedger Pro Kit. Plus, they've now launched the brand new Weed Whacker 2.0, which confirms they have all the best tools for your hygiene toolbox. Time for you to upgrade your toolbox by going to manscaped.com and using our discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for 20% off plus free shipping. The Beard Hedger Pro Kit is the ultimate package that makes it easier than ever to craft your signature look. This thing is an elite beard trimmer. It's tough on hair but smooth on your face, leading to single stroke efficiency that brings satisfaction one stroke at a time. And with a nice beard, your face is perfectly groomed, right? Wrong. You need to keep an eye out for those tough-to-trim ears and nose hairs. The brand new Weed Whacker 2.0 offers improved blades and skin-safe technology with a no-tugging guarantee. It's never been so painless to mind your manholes. I never grow tired of reading that phrase because I did not cook up that expression. That comes from the writing staff of Manscaped. So I'll just leave that lurid image in your minds as I remind you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. I would greatly appreciate it. But thank you so much for watching my video. But more important, as always, onwards and upwards.